On the morning of August 4th, 1892, the quiet industrial town of Fall River, Massachusetts, was shattered by the discovery of a double murder so brutal and bizarre that it would soon grip the attention of the entire nation. In the modest home at 92 2nd Street, the bodies of Andrew Borden and his wife Abby were found slain with a hatchet in what appeared to be a sudden and frenzied attack. Andrew, a wealthy yet notoriously frugal businessman, had been found on a sitting room couch, his face nearly unrecognizable from the repeated blows. Abby, his second wife, lay upstairs in the guest bedroom, her skull similarly mutilated. Horror of the crime scene and the seemingly impossible circumstances under which the murders occurred sparked confusion and fear in the town and would eventually send shockwaves throughout the country. What made this case even more unsettling was that the primary suspect quickly emerged not from the shadows or a seedy underworld, but from within the very walls of the Borden household. Lizzie Borden, Andrew's 32-year-old daughter, Lizzie Borden, was by most accounts an ordinary woman for her timid married, deeply religious, involved in her church and social charities, and seemingly devoted to her father. Her relationship with her stepmother Abby, however, was notoriously strained. Friends and servants recounted how Lizzie rarely addressed her stepmother as mother, often opting for the colder Mrs. Borden. Tensions within the household had reportedly been escalating in the months prior to the murders. There were arguments about inheritance, property transactions involving the Borden daughters, and suspicions that Andrew was preparing to leave his estate to Abby's family. This domestic unease festered behind a facade of genteel respectability. The family lived under one roof, but emotional divides had rendered the house a cold, stifling place. The morning of the murders presented a scene that baffled investigators. Andrew Borden had returned home from his usual morning walk to find the doors locked and the household in disarray. Bridget Sullivan, the family maid, had reportedly been asked to clean windows in the blistering heat and was resting in her attic quarters. Lizzie claimed she had been in the barn during the time of the killings, searching for a piece of iron for an upcoming fishing trip. Yet no traces of blood were found on her, and her demeanor was described as oddly calm for someone whose father and stepmother had just been viciously murdered. Police arrived to find a house in panic, but with suspiciously little evidence of forced entry or theft. There were no signs of struggle. Abby Borden had been attacked from behind, her blood pooling on the floor beneath her lifeless body, suggesting the killer was someone she trusted or didn't hear approach. Andrew's murder was similarly brutal, but indicated no immediate defensive wounds or signs of alarm. Medical examiners later concluded that Abby had been killed earlier, likely while Lizzie was still in the house, challenging her account of being in the barn for an extended period. As investigators began to probe deeper, Lizzie's behavior and statements came under increasing scrutiny. She gave inconsistent reports about her whereabouts, what she had been doing, and when she had discovered the bodies. She mentioned hearing a groan or distressing noise when she entered the house, only to later contradict herself by claiming she heard nothing unusual. Detectives were also puzzled by her calmness and the absence of any visible shock or distress. Some even interpreted her behavior as cold or indifferent. More incriminating still was the report that Lizzie had attempted to purchase prussic acid, a deadly poison, just a day before the murders, though the pharmacist she approached refused to sell it to her. Adding to the growing suspicion was the discovery that Lizzie had burned a blue dress several days after the murders, claiming it was stained with paint. Prosecutors would later argue that this dress could have been worn during the murders and that the paint may have been blood. While the murder weapon was never definitively identified, a hatchet with a broken handle was found in the basement. Though its blade was clean, investigators believed it had been carefully washed and hidden. Public interest in the case surged. Newspapers ran lurid headlines, breathless updates, and speculative editorials. Journalists camped outside the Borden home, and the case became an early example of a media circus. The image of a prim, well-mannered woman wielding a hatchet to brutally kill her parents defied Victorian ideals of femininity and domesticity. It forced the public to wrestle with the idea that monstrous violence could reside in the most unsuspecting corners of middle-class respectability. The duality of Lizzie's persona church-going daughter and possible parricide was deeply unsettling, and public opinion quickly divided into fierce camps. Some believed she was an innocent woman being railroaded due to circumstantial evidence and public hysteria. Others were convinced that only someone with intimate access to the Borden household could have committed such a precise and silent crime. In broad daylight, the days following the murders were filled with speculation and gossip, yet little conclusive evidence. Despite these gaps, Lizzie was arrested and formally charged with the murders. Her courtroom appearances drew massive crowds, and ticket holders lined up for hours to catch a glimpse of her. The trial would become one of the most watched and written about events of the 19th century, not only because of the violence, but because it shattered preconceived notions of gender, class, and the boundaries of evil. The murders of Andrew and Abby Borden left a scar not just on their family, but on the American psyche. The crimes seemed to emerge from nowhere, with no warning signs visible to the outside world. A quiet home on a quiet street had become the scene of a grotesque tableau that defied logic and explanation. The community recoiled at the sheer ferocity of the act and the intimate betrayal it implied. The case forced many to reconsider the security of their own homes, the reliability of familial bonds, and the assumption that evil had a certain face or background. In Lizzie Borden, they saw both the horrifying possibility of guilt and the terrifying ambiguity of innocence. Lizzie Borden's trial for the murders of her father and stepmother quickly transformed from a legal proceeding into a national spectacle that captivated every corner of American society. From the moment she was formally arrested and charged, the case garnered headlines in every major newspaper and became a talking point in parlors, barbershops, and political circles. The trial, held in New Bedford, Massachusetts, in June of 1893, drew massive crowds who treated it more like theater than jurisprudence. Reporters jostled for seats, artists sketched her solemn expressions, and readers across the country devoured every printed detail about Lizzie's wardrobe, her composure, her fainting spells, and every whispered rumor that might point to either her guilt or her innocence. It was not merely a trial about a gruesome double homicide. It was a mirror reflecting the evolving tensions of gender, class, and morality in Gilded Age America. The prosecution built their case on circumstantial evidence, as there were no eyewitnesses, no confession, and no weapon definitively linked to the crime. They argued that Lizzie had both motive and opportunity. Tensions in the Borden home had long simmered. Lizzie was known to have resented her stepmother, Abby, and believed that her father was too generous with Abby's family. Failed attempt to buy poison the day before the murders, the suspicious burning of a dress, and the absence of any credible alibi all formed the backbone of the prosecution's narrative. But it was Lizzie herself, her peculiar behavior before and after the murders, that intrigued and unsettled the courtroom. Testimony from Bridget Sullivan, the family's maid, became central to the prosecution's argument. She described how Lizzie had directed her to clean the windows in the heat on the day of the murders, how she had reportedly heard nothing unusual from the upper floors of the house, and how Lizzie seemed oddly composed in the immediate aftermath of the crime. Her descriptions painted a portrait of a woman in control, unaffected, almost mechanical in the face of slaughter. The prosecution also emphasized the improbability of an intruder committing the murders. The doors were locked from the inside, no valuables were taken, and the murders occurred in broad daylight without any of the household members, including Lizzie, reportedly hearing anything. A particularly damning piece of testimony came from a druggist who claimed that Lizzie had attempted to purchase prussic acid, a powerful poison, just a day before the murders. Though the judge ultimately ruled the testimony inadmissible, it lingered in the public imagination and became one of the many fragments of suspicion that followed Lizzie throughout the proceedings. The prosecution insisted that only someone with intimate knowledge of the household could have known when to strike and how to move through the home undetected. Their theory was that Lizzie had murdered Abby first in the upstairs guest room, then waited for her father to return and killed him on the sitting room couch. The defense, however, presented a formidable rebuttal. Led by former Massachusetts Governor George D. Robinson, they crafted a narrative that cast Lizzie as a virtuous, devout, and refined woman, utterly incapable of such savage violence. They emphasized her spotless reputation, her charitable work, and her long-standing presence in Fall River's religious community. The defense also highlighted the lack of physical evidence. No blood-stained clothes were found. The hatchet discovered in the basement lacked any definitive traces of blood or tissue. There were no bloody fingerprints, no blood trails, and no signs of cleanup. For a crime that left Andrew Borden's face nearly cleaved in half, the killer should have been drenched in blood, and yet none was found on Lizzie or anywhere obvious in the home. They also pointed to inconsistencies in police work. Investigators had failed to properly secure the crime scene, allowed multiple people to move freely through the house, and even misplaced potential pieces of evidence. A critical weakness for the prosecution was the perception that law enforcement had bungled their investigation from the outset. These missteps were not lost on the jury. The defense further argued that it was unreasonable to assume Lizzie could have committed such a grisly murder, cleaned herself thoroughly, disposed of the weapon and bloody clothing, then acted composed all within a narrow window of time and in a house that was not empty. Public opinion was sharply divided. For some, Lizzie was a monstrous parricide, hiding behind a pious mask. For others, she was a scapegoat and upper-class woman subjected to a witch hunt because she did not conform to societal expectations of femininity. Women in particular followed the case with intense interest, as Lizzie's fate seemed tied to broader questions about the role of women in society. Could a woman, especially one of Lizzie's breeding and social standing, commit such unspeakable violence? Could society believe a woman capable of wielding a hatchet with such ferocity, or was the image simply too jarring to accept? The trial highlighted the fragility of social roles, revealing how quickly a woman could be cast from the pedestal of purity to the depths of depravity. Throughout the trial, Lizzie remained calm and often impassive. She fainted once during testimony, describing her father's wounds, but otherwise maintained a composed demeanor. Her self-control, depending on one's bias, was either evidence of her guilt or proof of her innocence. The all-male jury ultimately took just over an hour to deliver a unanimous verdict of not guilty. As the court clerk read the words, Lizzie reportedly let out a quiet gasp and sank into her seat, tears welling in her eyes. She was free to go, but the stain of the accusations never fully washed away. The outcome stunned many observers. For some, it was a miscarriage of justice, a cold-blooded killer let loose because society couldn't accept the idea of a murderess in a lace collar. For others, it reaffirmed faith in the legal system and the American principle of reasonable doubt. But the verdict didn't erase the questions that had haunted the case from the beginning. If Lizzie didn't kill her father and stepmother, then who did? Why were there no other suspects? How could someone enter a locked house, commit two murders, and vanish without a trace? These lingering uncertainties turned the case into fertile ground for speculation, gossip, and myth-making for generations to come. Lizzie's trial was not just about guilt or innocence. It became a theater for the anxieties of a rapidly changing America. It was a time of social upheaval, with women beginning to assert more independence, the media growing in power, and traditional structures of class and gender being questioned. Lizzie Borden stood at the intersection of all these forces, embodying a crisis of identity, justice, and public perception. Her trial revealed more about the society that judged her than about the woman herself. Whether she was a cold-blooded murderer or an unjustly accused woman remains a question that continues to haunt and fascinate over a century later. The legend of Lizzie Borden has endured far beyond the legal facts and court transcripts, evolving into a cultural phenomenon that has both haunted and fascinated the American imagination. Despite her acquittal in 1893, Lizzie's name has remained inseparable from the gruesome murders of her father and stepmother, solidifying her place as one of the most enduring figures in the macabre history of crime. The public could never quite reconcile the image of the prim, church-going woman with the savagery of a hatchet murder. This dissonance birthed a mythology that transcended history and entered the realm of folklore, literature, film, and popular culture, making Lizzie Borden a symbol more than a persona representation of how quickly innocence can be overshadowed by suspicion, and how society processes guilt, when hard evidence gives way to ambiguity. In the years following the trial, Lizzie attempted to reclaim some form of normal life, but found herself permanently exiled by her community. Though she continued to live in Fall River, she moved out of the house on 2nd Street and into a more affluent neighborhood, buying a mansion she named Maplecroft. Despite her new surroundings, her wealth, and legal freedom, Lizzie lived under a cloud of social ostracization. Her former friends distanced themselves. Her name became a whispered cautionary tale. Even those who believed in her innocence found it difficult to associate with her publicly. The trial may have ended with a not guilty verdict, but the court of public opinion rendered a far more enduring judgment. As time passed, the facts of the case began to blur and mutate in the public consciousness. The stark details, the 19 blows to Abby Borden, the nearly caved-in face of Andrew Borden, the image of a young woman accused of wielding the hatchet, became fodder for the imagination. In 1893, shortly after the trial, a morbid children's rhyme began circulating, immortalizing the event in a chilling sing-song. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. The verse was not just inaccurate, but grotesquely exaggerated, and yet it stuck. It became one of the earliest examples of American true crime folklore, passed down not just as history, but as eerie chant, repeated without context, without question, and often without knowledge of the trial's actual outcome. The rhyme gave Lizzie Ann almost mythic status. She became less a historical figure and more a ghost story. Writers and playwrights found inspiration in the contradiction she represented. Was she a wronged woman fighting against a male-dominated justice system, or a killer who beat the system with cunning and calculation? Over the decades, Lizzie was portrayed in literature as both monster and martyr. Novels, poems, and later films would reimagine her story, often blurring fact with fiction, and in doing so, reshaping her legacy with each retelling in the 20th and 21st centuries. Lizzie Borden's story gained renewed interest with every cultural wave that challenged traditional narratives about women, crime, and justice. She became a muse for feminists, psychologists, horror filmmakers, and conspiracy theorists alike. Some viewed her as a tragic figure trapped in a suffocating domestic role and driven to violence by years of repression. Others saw her as a cold-blooded killer who used her gender as a shield to manipulate a legal system that couldn't fathom a woman committing such a brutal act. The ambiguity of her story made her adaptable, allowing each generation to project its own fears, questions, and theories onto her. Hollywood soon followed. From silent films to cable television dramas, Lizzie's tale has been told and retold, each version bending the narrative to match the tone of the times. In some adaptations, she is portrayed as a tormented soul, misunderstood and maligned. Others, she's depicted as a calculating sociopath who carefully planned the murders and exploited the limitations of forensic science and societal biases to walk free. These dramatizations, though rarely historically accurate, have kept her story alive and thriving in the public eye. Each retelling ensures that Lizzie Borden remains not just a name in a case file, but a living, evolving myth. The house where the murders took place has also become a site of pilgrimage for true crime enthusiasts and paranormal investigators. It has been preserved and transformed into a bed and breakfast, where guests can sleep in the very rooms where Andrew and Abby Borden met their violent ends. The house is filled with crime scene recreations, period furniture, and artifacts linked to the Borden family.
Oh.
It stands as both a museum and a morbid tourist attraction.
Oh.
A place where history, commerce, and fascination with death converge. Visitors are drawn not just by curiosity, but by a desire to touch the past, to peer into the rooms where the unspeakable occurred, and perhaps to make sense of a mystery that refuses to be solved. Beyond books and film, Lizzie has become a fixture in academic discourse as well. Scholars in gender studies, criminology, and American cultural history often use her story as a case study to explore the intersection of gender and violence. Her trial raises questions about how women are perceived in the context of violent crime and how societal expectations shape legal outcomes. Would Lizzie have been acquitted if she were a man? Would she have been charged at all? Was she shielded by her social status or targeted because of it? These questions have kept her relevant in scholarly circles, where she serves as both an anomaly and an archetype, the psychological dimension of Lizzie. Borden's story is also a rich field for interpretation. What kind of emotional landscape could produce such an act? Was she harboring deep-seated trauma or rage? Did she act out of desperation, fear, or cold premeditation? Or did someone else commit the murders, and Lizzie simply became a convenient vessel for the town's collective suspicion? The lack of clear answers has left ample room for speculation, and as a result, Lizzie has become not just a figure in a criminal case, but a canvas onto which society paints its darkest fears and its most troubling doubts. Her legacy is not just about what she may or may not have done, but about the public's enduring obsession with female violence, the limits of justice, and the spaces between truth and narrative. Lizzie Borden has achieved the rare status of becoming both historical figure and cultural myth. Her name conjures more than just a crime, evokes a mood, a genre, an entire lineage of dark fascination. In that sense, Lizzie Borden has never really left the house on 2nd Street. She lingers in books, in films, in lectures, in haunted, tourist brochures, and in the curious minds of those who seek clarity where none has ever existed.